Vagus nerve, the master shutdown. There's a nerve in the human body that controls almost everything you never think about. Heart rate, breathing, digestion, blood pressure. All of it travels through one single cable called the vagus nerve. It starts at the brainstem and runs all the way down to the gut. The longest nerve in the entire body. It passes through both sides of the neck. It sits behind the carotid artery, hidden beneath the sternocleidomastoid, that thick rope of muscle you can see when someone turns their head. There's no bone guarding it, no deep tissue shielding it, just muscle and skin between the outside world and one of the most critical nerves in the human body. When sudden force reaches the vagus nerve, it compresses against deeper structures in the neck. The nerve fires a massive signal straight to the brain. The brain reads this as a system-level threat. It triggers an automatic response. Heart rate drops, blood pressure falls, vision fades. Doctors call this a vasovagal response. It's the same involuntary reflex that makes people faint when they see blood or stand up too quickly. The difference is how fast it activates. Blunt impact can trigger it almost instantly. No warning, no buildup. The legs lose function before the person even processes what happened. They don't feel pain first. They feel nothing. Then they're on the ground. This is exactly why contact to the neck is restricted in nearly every combat sport on Earth. The vagus nerve is too close to the surface, too easy to reach accidentally, and the body's automatic response is too unpredictable to manage safely in competition. Carotid sinus, the blood pressure reset. Most people have never heard of the carotid sinus, but it may be the most sensitive pressure point in the human body. It sits on the side of the neck, just below the angle of the jaw. There's a small bulge where the common carotid artery splits into two branches. That bulge is the carotid sinus. Inside it are tiny pressure sensors called baroreceptors. They have one job: measure blood pressure. When they detect high pressure, they signal the brain. The brain slows the heart and opens blood vessels. Pressure drops. It's fully automatic. No conscious thought involved. Here's what makes this clinically significant. When sudden impact reaches the carotid sinus, it compresses these sensors against the cervical spine. The baroreceptors interpret that mechanical pressure as an extreme spike in blood pressure. So the brain does exactly what it was designed to do. It initiates a rapid correction. Heart rate drops sharply. Blood vessels dilate. Blood pressure falls faster than the body can compensate. The person loses consciousness, not from pain, not from structural damage, from their own autonomic nervous system triggering a cardiovascular reset. The brain registered a false alarm and responded with a full correction before anyone could override it. This is the mechanism behind most blood choke responses in combat sports. It's also why ringside doctors monitor neck contact so closely during fights. The carotid sinus doesn't respond to willpower or adrenaline. It responds to mechanical pressure on those baroreceptors. Every single time, 2 inches in any direction, and the sensors aren't reached. But when pressure lands directly on the sinus, the autonomic response activates on its own. Solar plexus, the breathing reflex. Right below, where the ribs meet in the center of the chest, there's a spot most people recognize, but few understand. Behind it sits a dense web of nerves called the celiac plexus. This is the control hub for the diaphragm, the muscle responsible for every breath you take. The diaphragm pulls down to draw air in. It pushes up to force air out. Without it, breathing stops entirely. There is no backup system for this function. When concentrated force reaches the celiac plexus, the nerves experience a sudden overload. The diaphragm responds with an involuntary spasm. It locks in the exhaled position. The lungs sit empty. No air comes in, no air goes out. That's what getting the wind knocked out of you actually is. It's not just a pain response. The diaphragm has entered a temporary state of paralysis. The brain is sending signals to breathe, but the muscle can't execute. The person doubles over. They can't stand. They can't speak. Every respiratory signal fires, but none of them produce a result. The diaphragm resets on its own, usually within 15 to 30 seconds. But during that window, the body is completely locked out of its own breathing function. This is why body impacts to the solar plexus region have stopped fights at every level of competition, from amateur bouts to world championship cards. Former fighter Bas Rutten became well known for targeting this exact area. He understood something that most people overlook. The celiac plexus doesn't adapt to conditioning. Abdominal muscles protect the surface, but the nerve cluster behind them responds to deep, penetrating force, regardless of how trained the person is. No amount of core strength changes the underlying reflex. The celiac plexus reacts the same way in every human body. Liver, the involuntary collapse. The liver sits on the right side of the body, tucked just under the lower ribs. It's the largest internal organ, one of the most blood-rich structures in the body, about 3 pounds in an adult, and it has very little natural protection around it. It's packed with nerve endings and blood vessels. Just beneath the skin, a thin layer of muscle and the edge of the rib cage. That's all that separates it from the outside. When impact reaches the liver, 2 physiological events happen almost simultaneously. First, the organ compresses. It's full of blood, so that compression sends a massive wave of pain signals through the intercostal nerves directly into the spinal cord. The brain interprets this as a serious internal event and initiates an involuntary protective response. Not gradual, immediate. Second, the vagus nerve detects the disturbance. Blood pressure falls. The legs lose strength. The person drops sideways, curling into a protective position, not by choice. The autonomic nervous system forces the body to guard the affected area. Conscious decision-making plays no role. This is why liver impact produces a remarkably consistent reaction across all individuals. One moment upright, the next moment down. The face shows confusion rather than pain. The body responded before the brain finished processing the input. Pain tolerance is not a factor. The reflex bypasses it entirely. What makes the liver so medically significant is that it cannot be conditioned. Muscle can be built around it, but the organ itself remains equally vulnerable regardless of fitness level. This is why it remains one of the most studied areas in combat sports medicine and sports physiology research. Peroneal nerve, the leg shutdown. On the outside of the leg, just below the knee, the common peroneal nerve wraps around the head of the fibula. That's the small bony bump you can feel on the outer side of the knee joint. At that exact point, the nerve has zero protection. No muscle over it, no fat layer, just skin draped over bone. The nerve sits directly on the bone surface like a wire resting on a rock, completely exposed. When force reaches this spot, the nerve compresses against the fibula and misfires. Signals to the lower leg become disrupted. The foot drops, the ankle stops responding. The person temporarily cannot lift their toes off the ground. Doctors call this peroneal nerve palsy, or more commonly, foot drop. When caused by a single impact, it's usually temporary, but for the next several seconds, the leg becomes functionally impaired. No pivoting, no pushing off, no reliable balance on that side. The entire foundation of movement is compromised from one point of contact. This is the neurological reason low kicks have stopped so many professional fights. Not because of tissue damage or pain, because the nerve signal between brain and lower leg is temporarily interrupted. The leg stops receiving commands from the motor cortex. And the effect is cumulative. Each time force reaches the peroneal nerve, it becomes more inflamed, more sensitive, more reactive. By the third or fourth impact, the leg gives out on contact. The person doesn't choose to go down. The disrupted nerve signal removes the choice entirely. The brain is still sending commands, but the pathway has stopped delivering them. Brachial plexus, the arm eraser. The brachial plexus is a bundle of nerves on the side of the neck that runs down into the shoulder. It controls the entire arm. Every motor signal the brain sends to the fingers travels through this one cluster. One bundle, one point of vulnerability. It sits in a narrow gap between the neck muscles and the collarbone. There's a specific point of exposure called Erb's point, right where the neck meets the shoulder. At that location, the nerve bundle is remarkably close to the surface. When sudden force reaches Erb's point, a shockwave travels through the entire brachial plexus. The arm loses sensation. The hand opens involuntarily. Grip strength drops to zero. The person temporarily cannot close their fingers or hold an object. The motor signals from the brain are still firing, but the brachial plexus has stopped transmitting them. This is why brachial plexus impacts appear in nearly every military combative study ever published. The mechanism is fast, it requires surprisingly little force, and it produces temporary loss of function in an entire limb within a fraction of a second. In grappling contexts, sustained pressure on the brachial plexus triggers involuntary release of grips and positions. The brain tells the hand to hold on. The disrupted nerve bundle tells it to let go. The nerve signal overrides the conscious effort. The duration depends on how much force reaches the nerve. Light contact produces tingling. Significant contact produces temporary but total loss of arm function. The nervous system treats it like a tripped circuit breaker. Motor output shuts off until the neural pathway resets and signals begin flowing again. Occipital nerve, the consciousness dimmer. At the base of the skull, right where the neck meets the back of the head, two nerves run upward from the spine and spread across the scalp. These are the greater and lesser occipital nerves. They pass through a small gap in the muscles at the skull base, and at that gap, they are completely unprotected. What makes this area different from every other entry on this list is what sits directly beneath it. The brainstem. The brainstem controls consciousness. It controls balance. It controls the automatic signals that keep the body upright and breathing. It is the most fundamental control center in the human body. When force reaches the back of the skull, the energy transfers through the occipital nerves and into the brainstem region. The brainstem doesn't have the same protective cushioning as the cerebral cortex above it. It sits at the base, pressed close to bone, and absorbs mechanical energy with very little buffer between it and the skull. The clinical result ranges from immediate loss of consciousness to lasting neurological impairment. Brainstem disruption is inherently unpredictable. Medical literature has documented serious outcomes, including fatal ones, from relatively moderate impacts to this region when the angle and force alignment reach the brainstem directly. This is why the rabbit punch, any impact to the back of the head, is prohibited in every regulated combat sport in existence. Boxing deducts points immediately. The UFC classifies it as an automatic foul, no exceptions, no interpretation. The area at the base of the skull is considered too neurologically sensitive for any competitive setting. Injuries here don't just end fights, they end careers. And in documented clinical cases, they have ended lives. The human body can recover from almost anything. Broken bones heal, torn muscles rebuild, but the brainstem operates on a different level. When its function is disrupted, every system it controls is disrupted with it.